Hey everybody, we interrupt your 4th of July celebration here in the United States to bring you news from Ridgecrest, California. This morning about 10:30, I was with my family downstairs minding our own business, and once again that earthquake thing went off. I'm 128 somewhat miles as the crow flies straight from Ridgecrest here to where I am in Southern California. And basically the whole building again started swaying, but this time was a little different than last time. There wasn't the, it was more of a, you could hear things kind of rattle and you could see stuff start to sway. Now what I did notice was a feeling of up and down, like waves on a boat. Anytime you feel that sensation and hear such a small amount of high frequency clicking and kind of rattling, you begin to think, well, two things. One, how long is this going for? Well, it went for probably close to a minute for us. Now, I'll get to that in a second. But the fact is, it was long waves and very large displacements. And I thought, that's a big quake. And that was somewhere distant, but not that distant, because it was still strong here on the coast. So I went and got on the phone to look up the right things, SCEC, if you want to look it up, scec.org, Southern California Earthquake Center. They're headquartered out of Caltech, and they have a lot of good stuff. It's one of the ways I got into geology as a kid, was a lot of stuff out of that SCEC Earthquake Center. That's where, it sort of originated with Charles Richter, if you recall the Richter scale. He was the inventor of that scale, which has been displaced now with moment magnitude, but he was the inventor of the original earthquake scale. And so he was a professor at Caltech. And so one of the things we have down here is a whole lot of sources for earthquake information. So instantly I was able to grab a ton of stuff. And I thought I'd just kind of go through a little bit of what I found. And also what, I told you what I felt. But I want to kind of relate it to gold, because it does. And so, and you're going, how? And well, I'll show you in a second here. But to start with, notice the sheer size of this thing. This region covers from the Central Valley. Let me mark this thing up a little bit in color. So we're talking about a region that goes from, essentially this whole zone, I'm circling in red, was shaking pretty strongly. This area in here was shaking very strong, and the strongest was right centered right on the town of Ridgecrest. It was just outside of their town by about 6 miles, and it's a it started out as a 6.6, but they downgraded it to 6.4 right now. It'll probably adjust around over the next few months. Mostly that's a process of crunching the data to find out exactly where the moment magnitude was and where the energy was being displaced to, and which instruments have good readings and which instruments are kind of questionable. And so that's really what we're looking at here, is this bullseye, and specifically the fact that bullseye follows a certain pattern. Now, I'll get to that in a second here, but the pattern basically is surrounded by you can think of it as a set of mountain ranges. We've talked about Horst and Graben, remember a couple months ago? Well, this is a perfect example. So one of the first things you have here is massive amounts of upthrust going on in the Sierra Nevada. That's in this first blue section. The second set of mountain ranges over are the Panamints, which are right here. And then you have Death Valley. And right through the middle of that stuff, in this region right in here, is an area called the Searles Valley or Searles Range. And so that's where this quake had its epicenter, some 6 miles down. So not exactly a shallow quake. 6 miles down. Let me check that. So anyway, deep quake. And deep quakes tend to be, on the surface, felt less strongly because a quake's energy dissipates as the cube of the distance. In other words, think of it as a sphere with volume. The bigger that sphere spreads out, the less intense the shaking. If you were in the center of that sphere, it's the equivalent, a 6.6, 6.5 is the equivalent of like a 5 megaton H-bomb. So you don't want to be there. You wouldn't make it. For miles around, you wouldn't make it. And so what happens here is that energy dissipates rapidly as it spreads out. But like I told you, we could feel it clear over here on the coast as an undulating rolling of the ground. I've seen these quakes before from out on the desert, and what you'll see if you look at phone poles is you'll see this pattern where the poles kind of sway and they swing. What they're doing is they're pointing what's called normal to the surface. They're at right angles to the surface where the phone pole is stuck in the ground. And they're showing you the angle that the surface is taking. And so this angle will vary with time, and you'll see these poles undulate in ripples, waves, but they move very fast. Scary. And you see that the cables on them just jerking around and twitching. So this was one of those kinds of quakes, 4th of July special. Not to make light of their situation up in Ridgecrest. Apparently they had a fair amount of damage. I haven't heard of anybody getting, any loss of life. I'm sure they'll find out, as they roll along, who's injured and that kind of stuff, because you don't have this much damage without somebody getting cut, and a lot of stuff fell. A lot of buildings were damaged heavily, including their hospital there. So they're closing that down and moving people out, which there isn't a hospital for quite some ways. The other place that's nearby is, way over in this corner off in this direction is Las Vegas. They shook like crazy. So this is a pretty big deal. Let me show you kind of what that means in layman's terms from the standpoint of a gold prospector. This area out here, especially the Searles Lake, is mineral rich. Now the reason it's mineral rich is these earthquakes and volcanoes along this region. The place is actively producing new minerals all the time. Anytime you get one of these quakes, you get a couple things. We talked about how the surges in the quakes can cause gold to precipitate out. It can also cause fissures that open up that allow the venting of hydrothermal material. There are hydrothermal vents in this area. I'm familiar with a few of them. The fact is that this whole area around Searles Lake is world renowned for its deposits of certain kinds of salts and minerals that are brought up through hydrothermal activity and that kind of stuff. And so there's a certain, and there's some beds there that actually have settled water for, like down in the desert. This is not far from Death Valley. And so there's evaporites and that kind of stuff. 20 multeam borax, those kinds of things are from that area. So let's take a look at Ridgecrest. Let me make sure we got everybody on right now first. I've been kind of, yapping along here. You could tell earthquakes are us. So this is Prospector Jess's view of the Ridgecrest earthquake Searles Valley event on the July 4th, 2019. And specifically looking at the Ridgecrest area, which has had big earthquakes in the past. There was one in 1995 or so. You can look that one up. It did a fair amount of damage to the town of Ridgecrest back then. That one was actually a little closer and a little smaller quake, but that's one of the things. If you have a smaller quake, if it's closer, it can still do a lot of damage. So that's one of those things. This could have been a very damaging earthquake had it been in the center of, well, this is a little bit smaller than there were dual quakes in the 1993, 4 San Fernando quake, Northridge quake. That thing had dual quakes that were separated by, like seconds. And so it had some very interesting reverberation echoes that created a much more disastrous situation. It was also a blind thrust fault. Nobody saw it coming. Blind means it's underneath. There's no fault line that protrudes through the surface of the earth that anybody can detect, but it was a major fault going horizontally directly under the San Fernando Valley. Go figure, and a big one. So when it cut loose big, and it was relatively shallow, so it was pretty damaging. Things hit, I think, in excess of a G. I think some things were accelerated close to 3 Gs, which meant the buildings actually threw up off the ground, went over and dropped on the other side of their foundations. That's how they knew they were, and they had several fire stations that did that kind of stuff. Things that shouldn't have been damaged were really, boom, just blown apart. So that's stuff, that's Earthquake 101. What we're going to focus on right now is our good friend, the gold prospecting, because I want to show you the connection between the two in this region. Let's make sure everybody's coming in loud and clear. There's the post. I see people on there. Make sure we got audio coming through. There we go. We're good. Okay, so let's take a look at this whole thing. If you got questions, post them below. I'm Prospector Jess from sourdoughminer.com, huntingforgold.com. Check out what we have. One of the things I wanted to bring to your attention is kind of as we look at this thing, where we're going to go is into the gold maps, and think of the pattern we see here. This is Ridgecrest, pretty much in the epicenter zone. There's this whole area, China Lake Naval Warfare Center is up north here. There's a big bombing range right through here. Army's over here in Fort Irwin. Fort Irwin was home to one of the largest quakes in California in recent history. It was a 7.1, 7.2 back in 99, 2000 range. You can look that one up as well. So this area is known for some whoppers, some big quakes. Now, I told you about Horst and Graben backways. This is a land of Horst and Graben, and what makes a Horst and Graben pop are these quakes. It makes them jump up or slide sideways. This one slid sideways. It's called a strike-slip fault. Very similar to the San Andreas. It's going sideways as opposed to thrusting upward or downward, so or sideways. And so what we're looking at here is a quake that has the potential for kind of less damaging. That's the thing they learned about the Northridge quake, was that they had previously in the 70s, we had a quake in San Fernando. It was more of a strike-slip type thing, and it did some damage, but nothing like the one in the 90s. And the reason was that thrust fault caused everything to pop upward. You know, as you move something, it's sort of like a tsunami. All of a sudden, there's waves that move vertically, whereas the strike-slip, things kind of shift and go horizontally, but that dissipates a little bit differently. The quake motion spreads out a little more horizontally than vertically, and that turns out to be a big difference in how much damage a quake can do. Go figure. You know, should have known that. They didn't have supercomputers when that stuff popped. Now they got models of it. So here we go. We're going to go over and look at what this means in terms of the quake and what it has done. I'm going to take us over to our good old gold map. Keep in mind this area right here, Ridgecrest, and we're going to draw a circle on the gold map. Over here is Mojave Desert and some mountain ranges. Over here is the base of the Sierra Nevada. So just bear with me a moment here. I'm going to get my Crayolas out and my famous gold map. So Google Earth, we pulled up the gold map for this region in California. As you can see, everything marked in yellow X's was a producing mine at some time or an occurrence. So when we go in here and we pop up one of these guys, we can see right here Del Oro is a commodity. First commodity was gold, and it produced copper, lead, and silver. So here we are with pyrites and that kind of stuff. Past producer, I don't know how far back. It's kind of irrelevant right now. So let's do a big old X on that map, just for grins. Okay, now where we are with Ridgecrest, the quake was centered somewhere over in the, you know, they say Searles Valley, but in reality it was kind of, you know, about 5 miles from Ridgecrest. I'm going to guess somewhere in this region right here. Okay, now here's what happened though. A whole series of aftershocks moved right down in this direction, right across Ridgecrest. That's kind of the direction this thing is kind of ripping loose with various faults. The other fact is this area is crisscrossed with a series of north-south faults. So it's really hard to tell who's moving who. Also, another thing to be aware of is down in this region, I'm having trouble spotting it, is a transverse fault called the Garlock Fault, which comes right through this region down in here. And so you've got this kind of mixture of faulting that can go on that's important to keep in mind when you're thinking about what's going on here. Now, and by the way, that Garlock Fault goes over and attaches to, it butts up against the San Andreas at the other end. So it's an important fault to keep in mind when it comes to, you know, watching for the fuse, because that's one of the reasons they are looking and set off, you know, all kinds of weirdness alarms, and we got every prognosticator of earthquakes has engaged because this is the big one, and the answer is, well, it's a big one. Could be another bigger one, because obviously the Hector mine was the one, and it was out here somewhere. Okay, that was a big one. That was a 7.1. But this area is known for this kind of stuff. Now, what I wanted to point out to you is this is Searles Lake right here. This valley right in here is Searles Lake. It's a massive anhydrite zone where there's a dried lake, and it's a region that is mined in the hundreds of tons of stuff, pulled out in terms of, all kinds of values come out of here, borates and all that stuff, boron, you name it. So there's stuff here. But what I wanted to call your attention to is notice in the mountain ranges surrounding this is a whole bunch of gold. We've got all these zones in through here and down through here that are gold rich areas. And notice, heading down toward Randsburg and all that stuff, of course, is some of the richest gold in California in the desert. So this is really a rich area. Now, why isn't there much in this area in the middle here toward Ridgecrest? Well, that's because if you notice, there's a ton of alluvium. I mean, literally a ton. It's lots of tons. So the only thing that happens is these mountains pop out from underneath it, and on the ridges or edges of those mountains, there's gold. So we go back to this whole business of the alluvial plains popping out of the top of these mountains. But what are these mountains telling us? What they're telling us is that the earthquake is a harbinger of geotectonics going on down below toward the mantle, causing stresses to build up and crack things. In addition to that, if you look closely, you'll see in some of these areas, probably right down in here, you see some darker zones over in here. There's volcanic activity along in here on the backside of the Sierras. So a lot of these zones are renowned for not just earthquakes, they're renowned for volcanoes and geothermal activity and hydrothermal activity and the emplacement of gold. That's what I wanted to kind of tell you about this story tonight, and that is that this is one of those cases where you can take a physical look, literally see the motion going on and realize that's the stuff that triggers the fractures, that causes the faults, that open up the gaps, that fill with hydrothermal venting material, fluids that are superheated and loaded with metals that somehow get up far enough or undergo an earthquake where they compress and then expand. And if they expand, they flash into steam, and just long enough to cause the crystals to start forming, because once the water dissolves that metal, once it hits a certain point where it's overly concentrated, they call it supersaturation, it will form crystals immediately. And so those crystals, even if they're fine crystals, will start seeding that water, which is already rich in gold, and the gold will start plating out. And that's one theory, not a bad one, about what actually causes gold to deposit, because they know it deposits in certain places. If it didn't, it would deposit all along the stringer, and it would be very hard to get much in the way of gold values out. You wouldn't see nuggets, you wouldn't see lode mines, because it would be too distributed. It'd be too much gold over too much distance and too much dirt to dig, right? But instead, they find it in little concentrations like we see right here in the mountains, the Dregna, and we see silver, gold, and copper. So again, we're looking at that. Now let's take a look at what they've got in that particular one. I'll bet it's sulfides. Underground, so it's a lode mine. Journal of Mines and Geology, 1951, not that far back. San Bernardino County. And that's kind of what there is for that one. Let's take a look at this one that's really in the unnamed shaft over near Ridgecrest itself. Copper, silver, gold is the primary commodity. And that one has a record that says we found it, let's see, it is an unnamed shaft, occurrence limonite, which is an iron ore, and quartz. So here we go, iron sulfide. And so copper, silver, gold, iron and silica, basin and range, that's the area they call that. Part of the basin and range is another term for Horst and Graben. You have basins and you have mountain ranges, and basins and mountain ranges, or Horsts and Grabens. So that's the kind of thought you have there. So that's a quick jump into tectonics meets gold. Kind of a living example. I just thought I'd bring it up tonight because it's fresh on my mind and I'm hot on it. So I don't have family members who live there now, but my brother and sister-in-law used to live right in this town, Ridgecrest, and she was brought up and lived in a town called Trona. It's out here somewhere. I want to say it's out somewhere near Searles Lake. I don't see it on the map, but Let's see. But this is the Trona Road right here. And what you see on the news right now is there have been several gorgeous shots of fractures going perpendicular to the Trona Road, which goes right along that line we were talking about. But they severed the road, and in some cases it shifted up to, looks like about 3 feet. Pretty good movement. And so, and in other cases, it actually buckled and shifted a foot upward. So, but most of the motion was horizontal, about 3 feet. So that's consistent with about a 6 or so magnitude earthquake and the amount of movement. It also means that the movement was, because it was 6 or so, it was probably limited, the thrust or the fault itself would probably limit out at 8. That was a big 4th of July, guys. Happy Independence Day. Mortars, neighbors. Tell them, it's not dark yet. California. So that is kind of the news for the day. 4th of July, 2019. So Government Gold Maps has sponsored this. It's one way you produce these custom maps to show you where to find gold. I also talk about how to read these different documents and what you're looking for when you're looking for gold. Check it out. It's on sourdoughminer.com/GGM. So I will catch you later, and I hope you have a great Independence Day. Enjoy your barbecue or your beer or whatever you're having, your celebration. Drink a cup of tea or a hot mocha java. Let's see. Oh, Mike McBride lives 40 miles from Ridgecrest in Kernville. Might just be going out to look to shake up in the next few days. Yeah, you ought to. Just see what happened. Happy 4th, says Paul. Great, Paul. Happy 4th. And David here is from Australia. So, we're shaking on this side of the world. Did you feel it over there? Probably not. Roy's here. Roy Martin, good chance. I'd say watching. Brad Stevens is watching in Colorado. Brad's out there prospecting as we speak. He went and made his trek from Texas to Colorado to go find some gold. That's great. And Joy Hiller is watching. Joy is very familiar with Ridgecrest. I hope you're doing okay, Joy. So we are going to close down for the night, but everybody stay safe and pray for those folks in Ridgecrest and the recovery they have ahead. It looks like it's kind of a mess. I hope they didn't get too much damage. There were a number of fires, about 6 or 8. So that can be a big problem. I hope people got their gas mains shut off in time. That's one of the critical things that we learned in the Northridge quake was get those gas mains shut off now, because they tend to blow up when they don't. I mean, really blow up, like take out whole blocks. So we had a number of those where they just, all of a sudden there was a whole block that disappeared because one house didn't have its main shut off and the main ruptured. One of my partners at Teradyne took a broomstick, snapped it in two, and jammed it down in the broken pipe. That worked okay to shut it off because the valve was already on the upper part and it had already broken off. Go figure. He just looked around for some way to shut the darn thing off and figured out that if he broke the broomstick, it would form a wedge and he could just shove it in the pipe and block off most of the gas because it was flowing full bore. So go figure. Be safe, everybody, and have a great 4th of July. Prospector Jess over and out. Good prospecting, and check out Government Gold Maps if you want to know how to make these things. Catch you then. Good prospecting and good night.